I am Francisco Mendoza. I'm the Realms Marketing Manager. My pronouns are he, him. Just want to go over a couple of things before I hand it over to Ada, who is our Casting Associate at the Playwrights Realm. So please submit any questions to the Q&A, and hopefully towards the last half hour, we will be answering those. I'll tackle some if I know the answer, and if not, I will pass them on to our panelists. If you see any question on the Q&A that you also have or that you want to see answered, please upvote it, so it should to the top. I also wanted to say that we are offering now on our community programming reimbursements for any caretaking expenses that you might have incurred to see this panel. There will be a form in your post-show email. Please fill that out, and we will ask you to provide some sort of expense proof to complete that reimbursement. Going over our values, the Playwrights Realm seeks to be an equitable, inclusive, anti-oppressive, and anti-racist organization. More information on our mission and values is available on our website, which I'm linking in the chat. Those values extend to this virtual space. If at any time you feel you experience something that is not in alignment with those values, please feel free to chat me directly or follow up via email. So I'm gonna drop the email and our website in the chat. Here. And I also wanted to remind you that at any point you can turn on your captions. Now Zoom allows for that to happen. So if that is something you need, feel free to turn it on at the bottom. And I'm gonna also drop that information in the chat. And I also wanted to do a brief land acknowledgement. I am joining you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Lenape and Canarsie people. I offer recognition and respect and acknowledge that colonization is an ongoing process that continues to impact the lives and lands of our Native communities. I want to acknowledge that in addition to the physical land we occupy today, the platforms, technology, and equipment that we are using consume resources that are based in physical lands and are not universally accessible to all peoples and communities. I am sharing a link in the chat for those who would like to learn more about the spaces we occupy, and I invite you to take a moment to name them in the chat. Thank you to everyone, and I will now hand it off to Ada, and I will exit. So Ada, if you could turn on your camera and video. Hello.
Hi, Francisco.
Well, I'll leave it to you, and I'll see you at the end.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction. And hi, everyone out there. My name is Ada Karamanyan, she, her pronouns, please and thanks. I'm the casting associate with the Playwrights Realm, and I'm coming from to you from my home in Seattle, where I relocated back to after a few years in New York. I moved back here last spring. When my colleagues asked me to consider hosting a discussion on the world of casting, it seemed like a no-brainer. As I almost immediately began reflecting on the early days of my foray into casting. I had moved to New York in 2016 in search of a career specifically in casting and in hopes to learn everything I possibly could about this side of the industry that I had not already sort of gleaned from my time in Seattle. In preparation, I devoured as many interviews and podcasts and recorded chats as I possibly could with casting directors, and I began to recognize the same key players on this side of the table kind of over and over again, and they were being sought out to advise the many of us interested in the work. And for this chat, I wanted to highlight folks I felt very deeply are doing some of the most fantastic forward-focused work in casting today, and whose voices are essential in the fabric that makes up our very theatrical corner of the economic conversation that's happening. Before I introduce this wonderful group, I thought I would talk just a little bit about casting and how casting and the Playwrights Realm operate together. My work as the casting associate with the Realm began in October of 2018, where I was brought on to primarily focus handling the entire casting timeline for all of the Realm's readings, workshops, and other developmental projects. And there are quite a few on an annual basis. And it's always very exciting, I will say. By the end of the first year, my role also allowed me opportunities to spearhead casting for the Realm's main stage productions, including the production of Mothers, which had its off-Broadway debut in September 2019, and Richard and Jane and Dick and Sally, which was a co-production with Baltimore Center Stage that sadly was forced to cancel prior to its New York debut in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent industry-wide shutdown. Over the past year, I've had the unique opportunity to continue my casting work with the Realm remotely from the West Coast. Casting projects as we move forward is still a matter that has yet to reveal itself. And that's generally speaking, not just in relation to casting with the Playwrights Realm. There's so much from the pandemic that's still sort of being sorted out and discussed. And while there is light at the end of the tunnel, we are still technically in hunker down mode, unable to fully and safely flex. So how we proceed into this next era of the American theater is to be determined. And I suspect some of my pals have a few ideas to suggest. And so with that, let's get them on screen. And before we do that, I'll ask an individual one at a time to kind of pop on, and I have a very specific question to ask them. For all of you viewers, I just want to say, or start by saying that this panel of folks are all actively working in the industry today. I highly recommend that you memorize their name, learn as much as you can about them, check out their existing work, and keep updated on credits that they have down the line. And if and when the time comes for you to hire a casting team, which I highly recommend that you do, reach out to them, invite them to be on board, and pay them fairly. So let's go ahead and start with the fabulous Andrea Zee. Andrea, please join us.
Hello.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I see you've saved the best for first.
Yes, the alphabet has ordained it so. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Ada?
Oh, I'm doing really, really well. It's been a busy morning, and I'm really happy to be here. So I'm curious, Andrea, when did your casting light bulb moment happen? I call it the casting light bulb moment because for me, it just sort of like, oh, casting, that's what I want to do. So I don't know, tell me about your experience with that.
Yeah, I feel like, as many casting directors did, I started casting kind of like in the car, listening to a soundtrack saying so-and-so would be great for that, just not realizing it was an actual profession that people had. My joke is always when people ask me this is that people are forced to be nice to me. But obviously that is it's simply a joke and not actually true. My light bulb moment came when I did a bunch of internships at NYU. I had the great luxury of proximity to all of the great theater here. So I did a different internship each semester and kind of weighed the pros and cons of all of them. And I stumbled upon a casting internship, and it definitely satisfied both sides of my brain. And I think that was when I kind of realized that this was something I could do for the rest of my life and actually, hop into work very happily every day. And so, yeah, I think it was just trying it out firsthand with an internship and realizing that I was able to not only satisfy my creativity needs, but also my orderly needs as well.
Cool. Thanks so much for sharing with us. And we're going to move right along. And please, Charlie Hano, will you join us? Hello, Charlie. Welcome.
Hello, Ada. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing okay. How are you today?
Fantastic. Thank you.
Well, it's so good to see your face after all this time. Okay. Charlie, please tell us about your casting light bulb moment. When did it happen? Were you home? What did you do?
So when I was in my youth at theater camp, my friends and I, kind of as a joke, created a Facebook group where we would just cast mainly musicals, but really any theater and even reboot TV shows with just different young actors that we knew. And I took it very, very seriously. And then my senior year of college, my friend asked me to cast her web series, which was a post-apocalyptic reboot of Xena the Warrior Princess. It was very edgy. It was a lot of fun. And even in that like little, just very sort of, strange, we're college kids and everyone's getting paid an ice cream kind of moment, I realized that I loved making actors feel comfortable in a space and how easy it was. And from then I pursued casting internships and now I am here.
That's so cool. Rad. Well, thank you for being here, Charlie. Let's go ahead and bring on Danica. Hello.
Hi,
Hey,
everybody. Hey, Ada.
how's it going?
It's going well. It's going well.
Cool. So tell us about your casting light bulb moment, please.
So much like my other panelists, I think we all like listen to cast albums and watch television shows, and we're like, I think I know the perfect person for this role. But it was in my senior year of high school, actually, that I was taking on a final senior project. And I have the great privilege of going to a pretty like fancy high school, a private school in New York City. So there's a lot of access to the theater world. And a parent at my high school is actually Diana Son. And she ended up being a mentor for that project. I was writing a television pilot at the time. I can't say that I'm a very good writer in terms of plot, but she noticed I was very excited about writing the details of the character, their personality, what they looked like, the energy they brought into the room. And so that's essentially a breakdown, which is what I do regularly now as a casting director. And that was kind of when the light bulb turned on. I ended up pursuing film and media studies at college. And then for my thesis senior year, I ended up interviewing 12 New York-based actors, asking them how casting directors can better advocate for them in the room. So it really, because there's no textbook for what we do, I decided to create my own curriculum, and now I'm here.
That's so rad. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm so happy you're here too. I'd love to go ahead and bring on Destiny Lilly. Destiny, please join us.
Hi. Hey, everybody. Hi, Ada. Thank you, everybody. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so thrilled to have you here. I was just chatting with your colleague Karen yesterday. We're working on a project and she was gushing about you. So I just want to put that out there. It's lovely to see you.
Well, she was gushing to me about you.
Oh, that's sweet. Well, tell us about your casting light bulb moment. What was that like?
Yeah, so I had already, I'd already gone to school and come out of school and was pursuing a career as a director. At least that's what I thought I wanted to do, was to direct plays. And I had this residency at the Ensemble Studio Theater. And through that, I ended up helping with like producing and casting. And I realized I was like, this casting part, like I get to work with actors, I get to meet all new people. I love that moment when it's like, oh, this person came in and read it one way and this person came in and read it differently. And it makes the play sound completely different. And I got really into that part of it to the point where I was like, that's almost like a letdown once you've already got everybody cast and then you have to go into rehearsal, you know? So I always felt like the casting process was kind of like the frosting on the cake. Like it was like the sweetest, nicest part. And so I was like, hey, I could do this. This is like a thing people do for a living, you know, like get to have the frosting all the time. So yeah, and I was like, wow, I really love working with actors and doing all, you know, it's exciting and it's fast paced and yeah. And that was a real thing for me that like shifted my career in a different direction.
It's so cool. I love that analogy, frosting on the cake, casting. It totally is. Cool. Thank you so much for being here, Destiny.
Thank you.
And let's go ahead and bring on Jason. Hi, at last, and only because of alphabetical by first name status, it's you. Hi.
You know, if we'd done that last name, Andrea would have suffered.
Which I understand is an ongoing theme for the two of you. That's a little game you play.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
Of course, that's what we do in our casting offices. What about you, Jason? Tell us about your casting light bulb moment.
I had mine in high school. I didn't really know what it was to be a casting director or casting anything, you know, casting professional of any sort. I didn't grow up in the theater. Like, I grew up in nerd school. Our big things were like math competitions and spelling bees and social studies fairs and science fairs. So I didn't grow up in that at all. And I didn't start until I got into high school. And that's when I started performing. And then a guy that was in our class, Bo Mahurin, had written a musical, a full-length musical while we were in high school, because why not? And I honestly came from a place of being like, the director, I was like, I don't know if they're going to make the right choices. And so I talked to my teacher, and she was like, well, we weren't really going to have like a whole like team. It was just going to be like someone was directing it. But she's like, would you want to be like the casting director? I was like, does that mean I get to make a decision about the cast? And my teacher was like, sure, go away. And that's kind of when it happened. You know, it wasn't until I was like flipping the CDs over of like The Wild Party and seeing like Jordan Thaler and Heidi Griffith's name to be like, oh, that's a thing. I don't know what that thing is yet. And then when I went to college, and I was still performing, but really shifting toward directing and choreographing. And I loved the audition process. I think I was a crazy person, but I didn't ever really care about getting to the once we did one performance, I was like, great, we're done, right? That's it. Next. So that kind of satiated my desire to kind of create, move on, create, move on. And I feel like casting is really great for that kind of, back to Andrea's point of like left brain, right brain, constantly fluxing back and forth. And that's kind of when I think it was like, I think it was senior, maybe junior year in high school.
Rad. I found in the past couple of years when I talked to casting folks that a common experience that a lot of us have is sort of like it appearing, which is why I call it the light bulb, because this isn't, there's no, I mean, there might be like now a course that people can take in the world of academia, if I'm not mistaken. A few exist out there, like in university settings or state college settings, which is pretty cool in some respects. And I think that that's just going to continue to kind of grow. And so to kind of talk about the entry point on that a little bit, I would love to open this conversation up a bit about how one might approach at the very beginning a career in casting. From everything that I can pull up, casting has always sort of existed in a who knows category of the like how you get in land of administrative opportunities, unpaid internships, and surprise, like you get to do this. Appointments from artistic leaders seem to dot many existing casting directors' resumes. In the past several years, theater organizations are leaning a bit more into their claims of inclusivity and are finally paying interns or hiring fellows or apprentices in casting. But where do they go from there is not entirely clear a lot of the times. Once you're done with an internship or a fellowship, there can be sort of this like out to sea. That was at least my experience after a year-long fellowship a few seasons back. So I'd love to kind of hear from each of you about like what you think are like good steps or recommended steps a person could take. You can reflect from your own experience. And we'll start from there. And this is sort of a popcorn style, I should say. So like, feel free to chime in and at any time. There might be, so everyone knows, expected like, not sure when somebody's done or not. So feel free to raise your hand or whatever you want to do. We'll create a little system of communication that works. So go ahead.
I think that's an incredibly challenging question, right? Like we've all had to go through it. It is daunting. It is scary. There's so much mystery around how casting works and how you get into it. For me personally, it was thankfully a connection through my college that I was able to lock down a first internship and make a connection with someone who was able to connect me to my next job. And when we say everything is relationship based, it still feels that way a lot of the time. But I'm interested in breaking down some of those barriers and those obstacles. So I was a part of a cohort of casting professionals through Broadway for Racial Justice, and it was a casting directive. So we had 11 students come in, wonderful, incredible humans from all walks of life, all types of backgrounds. Or were they artists, multi-hyphenates, coming in to learn about casting, what it was, how to do it, how to get the actual tools and learn how to use Breakdown Express, which is so hard to do when you are not working for an institution or have a paid account through someone else. It just was a way for me to give back and open a door. I think we're in positions where we can extend our hand and invite people to join us, and we should absolutely take them. More programs like the Broadway for Racial Justice Casting Directive should be created. I think that there is a path through education and sharing knowledge that we should really tap into as a community. And I think that's hopefully where we're going next. I do not like the pay for play, unpaid internships of it all, and hope that those go very, very, very far away. But I understand that they're still a part of our system. I think that this break during quarantine is allowing us to revolutionize our thinking for this industry, and I hope that we're pushing towards something way more equitable.
Great. Yes, I think that's such a wonderful thing to think about, like as we move ahead, that while in the past these have been sort of ways in that many of us have had to kind of navigate, that there are all these like ways of change that are existing. And I think it's also, I'm curious how that might work, or what are things to recommend to people who that might not be accessible to, or is there who don't live in New York or Los Angeles, let's say, where those programs exist. I started in the regional world and have returned to Seattle, which is still in the regional world. So there is, of course, other ways that casting, to get into casting, that people can explore. But I think that it's very exciting to consider these new avenues that are opening up. Anyone else, any thoughts on that? Or experiences of their own that they would like to share?
I was just going to say that in relationship to, getting into casting, like I was in the position where I decided that it was something I wanted to do and I was already out of school. And the way that like the kind of entry level into casting typically is through like an internship process that not only is unpaid, which makes it, in and of itself, something that is, discriminatory and unfair, but also you have to be in college to like most internships or require you to be getting college credit. So it's one of those things where it's like you're already kind of placing these barriers in front of people to have those opportunities. So, and I was definitely like, oh, how do I figure this out if I want to actually like pursue this? Because as a career transition, it can be very difficult for people. And now like I've mentored people who are looking to do a career transition, who have like been actors or have been writers or have been administrators in other ways, because I think that that's really important. But I think, overall, it's something where I had to really do a lot of work on my own and like build up my own, like I cast like everything for about 3 years. Like I cast like short films, music videos, like web series. I was like, hey, everybody, I used like the network of people I knew to be like, hey, like, do you have something for me to cast? And that's really how I started to like build my skill set and to also meet people and interact with people and like to really just get to a point where I felt confident doing that work. But I think that one of the things that I've been working on, and I know like all the people here and like a lot of other people in casting recently have been working on as well, is really finding ways to, decrease those barriers, eliminate them really, because what that does is that prevents us from having new casting professionals who have all the skills and talents, but just aren't able to work for free, or just aren't able to, don't know the right person, like Danica was saying, like, they don't necessarily like know the person who's going to help them with that opportunity. So I think it's really important for us as casting professionals to help to open doors for those who are, looking for opportunities. And it's not just about like who because I think that is really, and not just in casting, also in other parts of our industry as well, like that it's been very relationship based. And while I think it's really important to build relationships with people in work, I think that just reaching out to the people automatically creates like an unfair system. And that's something that, we're working to change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so cool. Thank you for sharing that too. My own personal experience, I'm glad you touched on like academia as sort of an entry point, especially in relationship to internships. I am a good example of somebody who actually does not have a college degree, because for me, it did not seem accessible to go to school in my late teens and early 20s. It was sort of like a matter of constant survival mode. And so that was, and so now I'm still navigating that, because the system still kind of has this like, you must have a bachelor's degree to be an assistant in casting, where we're just going to have you sit and organize papers all day long. So like there are still some points of entry that can be reformed, I think, in many ways. And I think kind of providing people as many opportunities as possible. And as you said, like going beyond just your comfort zone and like the people that is a really key way to do it. I try now that I'm sort of on the other end of the table to put myself back in the shoes that I was in 8 years ago, and think like, what would have been really beneficial for me then, and how can I do that for people who are assistants and associates out there now. So anyone else, please, I'd love to hear from anyone else with thoughts on this.
I was just going to like tag in there really quickly, just to say too, like, it's something that I don't think we can forget, that, a big part of the reason why the college credit requirement became so readily used is because basically unpaid internships no longer were an option. So like that shift happened, in order to maintain people being unpaid. And it's just something that like was really, for me, I probably would not be in casting had that rule been in place, to be 100% transparent, because I had already finished college. I didn't work in casting for the first year and some change in New York. And I saved up money because I knew I was going to need the money to pay for my rent, because I knew I was going to be being paid $0 every single week, year, whatever it was going to take. But like it's very important for us to kind of have the history of like how that process got to where we are now, and how it has had a residual effect, not only on individuals, but also like how the culture of casting is now. So that was just a really, for me, was, I'm grateful in a weird, perverse way that, like that wasn't the rule, but because I don't know if I would be, because I wouldn't have been able to get college credit. So I wouldn't have been able to get an internship, which is kind of really mind screwy when you start to really think backwards into that. But yeah, I think just the concept of not paying people for work in general is just a bad idea, period. Like it's not like whether that is an intern outside of our world, internships get paid, and they get paid pretty well. Very well, in fact. In some places, I've seen internships that have been paid more than I ever was working inside of a casting office. So it's possible. It's just about setting a budget and understanding what you can do, and that will also have a residual effect on what you're able to take on as a casting director. If you can't do all that work, then you're not going to take 74 projects on. So.
Indeed. I think before we move on, because I do have a few other questions, I want to be mindful of the time. I think that maybe a good idea is for us on the realm side of this conversation is to maybe create a little document, and I'll kind of chat with you all via email afterward, because I'd love for viewers who are interested in knowing like what are avenues that they could explore, maybe outside of a university setting, like getting a college degree in theater arts and business administration or something like that, to which you would think like, okay, what do I need to study to learn everything about casting? There are other ways, some of which have been brought up, been mentioned so far. So, so for all of you out there interested, I think we could arrange to make that public at some point. And great, I will move on. Just for the sake of timing, I'd like to talk about, I know some of these questions are kind of deep, so just bear with me, but there's so many things to talk about. But I am interested in knowing, let's see, it seems that we casting folks are often asked to create miracle casting outcomes. And without much work besides some sort of like gentle persuasion, and that's, of course, as we all know, not always the case. So we are also often tasked early on with learning a system that requires a great deal of memory, storage, organization. And sometimes it can feel like we are drowning in intel and data. I'm curious how you navigate, the daily pressures and sometimes extraneous expectations presented to you as casting fellows or professionals, excuse me. Yeah, how do you keep your head afloat? What do you do?
I'll jump in. As someone who spent many years in a large office where, projects were kind of handed to me. It was, cast this. It wasn't, would you like to cast this? And now as an independent and small office casting director, I am able to have that freedom a little bit more of choosing not only which projects I'd like to work on, but also choosing what teams I'd like to work with. I think that kind of dedicating and taking the time to get to know the producers, the directors, the casting team, and not only, getting on the same page in terms of expectations, but also getting on the same page in terms of honestly, like personality and values and what level of miracle worker are you expecting me to be at this point? I think that having that freedom now as an independent casting director has really helped me with that kind of aspect and kind of developing the courage to say no to something if it just doesn't gel right with me, or, if we're just not necessarily compatible, and perhaps passing that along to one of my other colleagues. I think that really helps me, just because I don't necessarily have that lack of an option of working on something that I did in a large office. So, I'll definitely name that as, one of my top tools in managing the miracle worker issues that we all face, is kind of, identifying and nipping it in the bud, as it were, before we even get into the audition room. But I'll also say that, transparency is also a huge tool, and just being honest and saying, I can't Frankenstein actor A and actor B together for you to make actor C. It sounds a little silly, but I think, all of the casting professionals here on this panel know what I'm talking about, where they say like, oh, well, so-and-so, has the acting chops, but so-and-so has the dance, and this person has the voice. So just find us that, right? And the acknowledgement that all of us are human beings, not only the creative team, but also, the people who are coming in to audition for us. Like, we're all human beings with our wonderful flaws and strengths and talents and contradictions. So I find that helpful reminder is, sometimes a given, but it needs to be said out loud sometimes. And with that kind of perspective, I live to see another day, I guess.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. I love a lot of your analogies there, the Frankenstein expectation, especially. Anyone else, please? I'd love to hear what you have, what you do, or some experiences, maybe some challenges you faced and ways that you've kind of come out of it.
I am a big believer in just outsourcing your own memory, just spreadsheets and Google Docs and writing everything down has just saved a lot of my brain. I know I'm very fortunate and often asked to work on projects that are very specific and have very, very specific specs. And even if I think I have everyone in those community memorized from, top to bottom and every single thing about them, it doesn't matter if I think that or if I dream about it even, I have to write it down immediately. And I'm a big believer in spreadsheets. I think it also helps for casting directors if you know which agents are the most beloved by their clients. Because I have found that a lot of actors from marginalized communities, while they may have very successful agents and while they may have great working relationships, there are things behind the scenes that aren't maybe necessarily talked about, but there are actors from those communities that, would sword fight for their agents. And if you find out who those people are, they will help you. And we can all be on the same team.
That is such a good point that just to mention that for actors who we are representing as casting folks, that there is this other world that we are communicating with, particularly in regions like New York and Los Angeles, Chicago and DC, and then of course overseas in the UK, where we are working with managers and agents pretty frequently on projects. And so establishing relationships and kind of getting even a little bit deeper, as you just mentioned, Charlie, I think is really essential. I think there is a way to that even translates in cases where acting communities are widely not represented. Speaking from somebody in the Pacific Northwest, that is the case. There's maybe one agency out here, but they mostly work in like commercials. So I think there is a way that also can translate in those regions as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you. Anyone else, please jump in.
Just thinking about like keeping my head above water. Absolutely spreadsheets, Google Docs, and anything on Google G Suite like is my best friend. But I've also noticed that for me, writing things down in a notebook and actually going through the process of thinking about it, writing it down, it just helps me remember better, like simply that. And I have another place other than the computer, just in case technology fails me, where my brain exists. But mostly when I think about like not drowning with all of the expectations of a casting director and trying to fit the team that you're working with, I have to remind myself that I am worthy of this position. I can do this work. I am smart, I am capable, they hired me for a reason. I think that a lot of imposter syndrome can pop up, particularly as a Latina in this industry. There can be feelings of doubt that are imposed on me by a white supremacist system. And I have to release myself from that. And I encourage others to release themselves from that, because if you know that you can do this and you've had the training, even if you've studied by yourself, if you have that belief in yourself, there's a higher chance that you won't feel like you're drowning. And that's easier said than done. I completely understand that that is super difficult. And I'm still on that process of learning and unlearning things. But I say that as a reminder to the folks listening and as a reminder to myself that I am certainly capable of this and I will survive this project.
Thank you for saying that. I think that that's such a valid, not that you need validity, excuse me, that's not the right word. It's such an important thing to kind of lean in on in this conversation too, because as casting directors, especially if we are creating our office space, and even if we're not, we could still be advocates for creating space that is conducive for the people that work there, and like prioritizing their mental health and everything. That was, I think, and for a lot of us, we can relate that we've been through experiences where that's not been the case. And how is anyone expected to do their best work if they're not in a place that allows them to essentially do that? And so we have a responsibility if we are in a position of hiring people. And I would even go as far as to say that we can, especially those of us who are coming from a place of privilege, that we can advocate for those who we work with, whether they are on the same line or whether they are somebody that we are employing underneath us, because that is so crucial. And things like sleeping and eating well and often, and fueling your body and being able to turn off your brain from casting and say, oh my gosh, it's 7 o'clock and I'm actually like doing what I want to do. It's nice, and I recommend it. And I think that anyone who's interested in casting especially should go in with that. We should normalize, my goal is to normalize mental health and self-preservation. And I think that we will ultimately, better work will come of it. So that's my 2 cents on that. Does anyone else, please, anyone have anything to say on this?
I mean, the one thing that always hits me is like the kind of going back to these miracle concepts that like teams, producers, whoever may be coming to us with. It's really important for us also, like as casting professionals, to kind of push back against that, because ultimately, if your ability to fundraise or to produce something is contingent upon somebody that I'm casting, then I'm a producer. Whatever associate producer, executive producer, whatever you want to call it, I don't care. So like, it's important for us to also, which ties into what I'm hearing a lot here in this conversation, is about boundaries. You know, like boundaries. And I'm really great about, you know, or I don't know if I'm great at it, but what I like to think about mostly for myself is creating those boundaries in a very on paper kind of way. My contract with a producer. If you're an independent casting director, you're going to have to understand how to negotiate contracts, or at least how to read them and understand like what this part means, what this part does not mean, what these words mean, or have someone that you can turn to and be like, I don't know what any of this means. Can you please help me? So like, you know, understanding contracts, which I don't think anybody has been told that. I wasn't told that in any internship that I had. Even when I worked at a larger office, nobody taught me how to do that. I did it because I'm crazy. But, you know, like, but that has ended up being the place where I feel like I want to contribute as much as I can to our community. It's because I love looking at those contracts, because it sets up some strong boundaries on paper that this is what I do, this is what I don't do. And even if that becomes an issue, you can always reference back to that, you know? And I think that's a really important thing going forward, especially for independent contractors, independent casting directors.
Yeah, that's a really good point of contracts and like learning the specifics around like navigating your own business. And even if you're not, as you said, like when you were in a larger office, when I was a fellow, those were not things that were necessarily taught. It was sort of like you just dive in and do the work, and that'll all sort itself out, which gives you some sort of idea that you should trust that everything is kind of working to benefit you, but in the end cannot. And so that's something that the industry in general, the people that we're working with, I think we are collectively trying to change is, what do we do? Number one, what do we need? What hasn't worked? And what should and will work? So contracts, yeah, big one. I'd love to hear any thoughts from you, Destiny. If you have it, I'd love to engage with you on this question. Please chime in before we move on.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with my colleagues on a lot of the things that they've said. And I also think that Especially what Charlie said about organization, and what Jason was talking about boundaries. I think sometimes, especially if you're working with other people, like my tendency is to kind of hold knowledge in my head. And sometimes when you're working with other people, that's not super helpful because they're not in my head. So learning the skill of being able to keep track of things in like a group way, in a way that like helps your colleagues work with you, and that also helps you to work with them, because I don't know what's in my colleague's head either. So sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I already talked to that person, or I already did this thing, or, so it helps like in terms of teamwork to really find ways that you can kind of keep things all in one place so that people can kind of pass the baton between each other and work as a team, which I think is important, because casting is really about teamwork, whether you're working with like another casting director or an assistant or an associate, or working with our creative teams. It's really about finding that teamwork. And then for me, in terms of like balance and stress, like there are usually times when I'm just like, it's funny because now during the pandemic, like I used to just be like, oh, I have theater tickets at 7, so peace, or I was like, I'm going to see a show. And now in the pandemic, it's like, well, I could feasibly just sit here working until, 11 p.m., but I prefer not to, So, or sometimes, with the nature of being online, you're dealing with people who are on the West Coast, so it's earlier for them, I'm like, hey, it's like 9:30 for me here, but just finding like the way that like Jason was saying, setting boundaries with people, just like, reminding them, it's like, okay, I'll get to that tomorrow, just being like, great, kind of like closing your computer, and then, making dinner or whatever the thing that for me, like, it used to be like going to the theater. It used to be like, okay, I've had my day. Now I'm going to go see a play, maybe meet my friend at this play, have a drink before or after dinner or something, And now, like during the pandemic, it's more like I have to create that boundary for myself. Where I'm just like, okay, closing my computer, gonna go make dinner, call someone on the phone, that kind of thing, to have that kind of release, because it can be, stressful, but I think setting those boundaries and also just being really clear about what service you can provide, because, like Andrea was saying, like, sometimes people have impossible expectations. There are people who like, or, they have champagne taste and beer money, it's like, okay, you may want, this world famous actor to be in your regional theater play, but that's not a realistic situation here. So sometimes you just have to find ways to talk to people like, okay, so you're looking for like a Hugh Jackman type, like, but it's also our job to introduce, like, to solve problems. Like, our job is to solve problems. So it's like, I will introduce you to actors who have that charisma or have the thing that you're looking for. And then they forget all about, hopefully, the famous person that they wanted you to go after, even though, it's a relatively small production. Yeah, but that's all about, like, I think, the thing that we're all hitting on is that how important it is to be able to really work with other people, because casting is very much like a people business, in terms of like the actors, the creative teams, other casting people. But yeah, I also, the thing I always say to myself is like, as important as our work is, which I think it is important, it, like, we don't work in an ER. Like, if you don't send this email right now, no one is going to die, like, it's okay. It's like, it's going to be okay. Like, the work that we do is important, but we're not necessarily, we don't hold lives in our hands. If I take a minute to like have dinner, like, or call my mom, where like everything's going to be okay. And I think that's something to always keep in mind as well.
I am so happy you said all of that, because it brings up so many thoughts and ideas and questions that I have, that with a lot of time I would ask the group. I think one of the things I've been kind of pushing back on and trying to establish sort of a clear way of how to navigate my own career is establishing the expectation that I'm not a mind reader, and casting folks should not be expected to be a mind reader, and vice versa, as you said, and that erring on communication, more communication than less, can be really helpful in that. And yeah, it is sort of a tango that we do with people, and kind of learning very quickly how best to sort of navigate each individual casting arrangement that we have. And even the individuals within those projects can be very different. And so that's all I think really important. So yeah, establishing boundaries and everything is so essential. So thank you for saying all of that. I did have a little question that kind of sprung up, something that you said, though, that was sort of unrelated, though. I am just generally curious if anyone has any thoughts on or has ever thought about the idea that for casting folks, we are, at least historically, there, we sort of need to know who's out there and who's doing things, and which kind of has us working about 300 hours a week, because if we're not in the office, we're watching TV, we're watching movies, we're seeing a show every night, maybe 2 shows. I found early on in my career that was not going to work at the same level that like people who were training me were doing it. It just was not feasible. And so I'm curious, just briefly, if we may take just a couple minutes to hear. I had wondered, like, is there a way to marry that in with the office work? Is that a thing? I had always thought, like, what if like we were paid to go see matinees during the work week, and like that was like part of it, like part of what we do, because it kind of is essentially part of what we do. But I don't know, like, it's a very messy question, but I don't know. Anyone have any thoughts on that? If nobody has thoughts on that, that's okay. But I'm curious.
I mean, yeah. Like, I mean, obviously we're in a typical structured situation. There's usually only that one Wednesday matinee. Maybe it's been displaced to another day to like compete, but that's what makes it a little difficult. But for me, I also believe that if I'm working with another casting person and there's theater that we're even a movie, it doesn't matter, any sort of like anything we're going to potentially take in new information that will inform things later on, then I should be responsible for paying for that kind of stuff. Then I should be responsible for, paying for that time as well. Like, I don't think that should fall on to employees. And I know there's different like varying degrees of what happens in that, and nor should it be expected. I think that's the part too. I think the expectation that exists is kind of this unspoken thing. And I feel like that also starts to eat away, especially when I was a younger person. I was like, okay, whatever you need me to do. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I have to do this. I have to go to theater 7 times a week. I have to go do this. I have to go see blah, 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 everything that I possibly could. And I imagine, especially now with streaming platforms, that didn't really exist when I was an intern, But, I think that you could literally never stop ever and create any sort of boundaries. It almost makes it difficult sometimes for us to even enjoy watching TV. At least with me, it's hard for sometimes. Sometimes I like watching the stuff that I know I'm already going to know everybody on it. Like, I love watching The Blacklist. Love it, because it's mostly all New York actors that I already know. And I'm like, great, they're doing a great job. Good job, Michael Thomas Holmes. You're killing it. Like, I don't have to be like, let me learn, like, and it also might show me a different aspect of that person, which is going back to, I think, something that Charlie said, like, I should not automatically assume that I know everything about that person. And that's been a good way for me to kind of like learn other aspects of people I already know. But that also limits the kind of like enjoyment time that you have at home watching certain shows.
I want to echo. Oh,
sorry,
you go.
You go.
I just want to echo Ada in saying that I also found that practice unsustainable, just like for many reasons. I need rest. And so I've kind of figured out ways to carve watching and participating in shows into my life without having to sacrifice that rest. The first was obviously like, I have every streaming service possible. Like I am tapped in, and try to spend a good chunk of my evenings watching it, but also understanding like this can also be a part of my rest. I still haven't figured out how to turn off the CD in my head. So she's kind of always there with a notebook on the side of her bed. But the other thing that I approached my team with at the Public was general auditions. I think carving out space to hold space for new actors and new voices is so important. We can often go to the same community of actors who we know and we love their work. But there are people coming up from programs, people who are making theater like guerrilla style, that would potentially be amazing for some of the work that we're creating. So I think it's important to create that kind of access. We created a mailbox that people can send in their headshots and resumes. You can also physically send snail mail to us, and we review all of that and put you in consideration for a general audition. And particularly during this period of where we're all working remotely, it was really refreshing to get to know people and give this like glimmer of hope. Like, I think that everyone, including us, wanted to get back to the work we do and to get back to the community we love. And so opening that door was mutually beneficial. So I really recommend the general audition if you have the resources to do so. It can be really wonderful and you can meet some incredible people.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, like, I agree wholeheartedly. I'm a little bit the opposite. I'm the person that's like, I want to go. I'm like, oh, I don't have a show tonight. Darn. So I do miss going to theater. I was the last year, I was a Lortel voter, so I saw like 110 off-Broadway shows that year. Like I was like, more. I can see more. Yes, but that was also like my way of kind of like relaxing. And it was the way I would connect with my friends too, because it's like, great, you always get an extra ticket. You bring your friend, you go have a drink or dinner. And it's like, that was like, it was just as much a social outlet for me as it was like, a work thing too. Cause it's like, oh, I get to see actors. But I think, I've come to terms with the fact that there will always be actors I don't know. And that's okay. Because you feel like, oh, if I just watch every show and I read every Deadline article and I like skim through Playbill and I do all these things, and then I'll know everybody. And there's always somebody, and literally have a meeting and everybody will be like, hey, what about this person? You're like, no, it feels like a test I studied for and like miss something if someone brings up an actor I don't know. But I've like come to terms with like, yes, they're actors I'm not going to know, right? It's our job to know, but like you can't know everybody, and it's like, it's impossible. And there's actors all over the world. So like, I always take it as like, no, I don't know that person, but now I'm going to like research them. And like Danica was saying, I think also during the pandemic, it's given me more time to focus on doing general auditions with actors, which is something that it always felt like, yes, I do like a couple here and there, but it's like, oh, we don't have time to because I think that it's like, oh, it's so busy, we don't have time. But that's something that I've like really prioritized during this time. And I'm hoping to continue to prioritize even as we move past that and get back to the theater, because, there are people who would be great. We just don't really know them yet. And the way to get to know them is to meet them. So I'm really a big fan of embracing that.
Thank you so much, all of you who shared on that little sudden question that I had that popped up. There's so much, I think, to kind of take from that and to think about, and I think would be really useful for those who are interested in casting curious, let's say, to keep in mind. I think kind of going back to like the pressures that we talked about before, there is sort of this, occasionally can be kind of like a superhero quality that we have to take on, and it's not necessary. And we can go at our own pace, and everyone's different. And I think that's really cool and valuable for that matter. So, so we are getting, we have some questions from folks, and I'd like to get to them, but I do have one last, for the viewers, apologies, I have one last question that I'd like to pitch to the panel. And then I promise we'll get to at least one or two of them. And could find out a way to answer the other ones, if not during this chat, offline. So we'll get you. I would love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on, actually, you know what? I have, this might be kind of like a duo question, so forgive me. You can choose to just answer one part of it, but this is what I thought when I thought I had a lot of time. I wrote, I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on the state of the art as we begin to exist in the shadow of the first quarter mark of the 21st century, in what seems so expectedly chaotic, considering our nation's history, how does art survive? How does casting fit into that all? And what are ways that you are excited to see the role of gatekeeping casting has historically had on opportunities change? I'm asking us all to solve every issue there is in casting. So that's a big, tall order. So that is a question that I have, but kind of related, and maybe on a bit more of a whimsical note, I could also rephrase that and ask, what are some of your pie in the sky hopes and dreams of the world of casting? So take all of that in. Forgive me. And please share. Thank you, Jason. And please share any thoughts that have floated to the top of your mind based on that.
I'll cherry pick some of that if you don't mind, Ada. I have this like notorious love-hate relationship of art as a commodity. There's so much to unpack there that, we'd still be talking next week. And yes, I have a lot of opinions about it. But yeah, I have a very complicated relationship with our relationship with capitalism as a whole, as a respectable kind of income, not especially in New York City, but nationwide, and all of that stuff. And so I think in terms of the pie in the sky analogy, I think that once we're able to kind of not necessarily legitimize, but kind of solidify exactly the relationship we have with monetary value, with non-monetary value, with arts as a real job. We've seen so many, those like notorious advertisements where it's like, so-and-so thought she could be a ballerina, but then now she's a doctor. I forget what company that was, but that was like a real ad that a large corporation posted, kind of belittling the arts and kind of lifting up, I think, STEM or something like that. And so I'll kind of leave it at that because I don't want to unpack too much of it with our limited time. But yeah, that's the biggest grappling issue I have in terms of pie in the sky solutions with capital A art, let's say.
Thank you. I know I just posed the most wildly complex question right at the tail end of this all, but I appreciate your thoughts on that. Please, anyone else, share away.
Yeah, I think it's just those are huge questions, and rightfully so. Ultimately, yeah, to touch on the point of the commodification of art, and if we are, especially as it relates to casting, if we are saying that casting is an art, we have to be very careful about how we continue to step forward into that, and how not only in pricing, but in how we also delineate, again, back to boundaries, where that casting process and the service of casting, where that starts and stops. Because ultimately at that point, if we've turned casting into commodity, then the whole point of a commodity is driving price down, which will ultimately put us all out of business. Because we're not going to be able to afford to have anything or just afford to live in the places that we all live, which none of them are cheap places. And I think as far as pie in the sky, I think and especially the gatekeeping part is what's kind of kicking around in my head, because we hear that word a lot. For me, it is a certain level of economic transparency that should exist. The better we can get about that and within our industry, I think the more success we will have, because ultimately too, gatekeeping is only successful if we're keeping what's on the behind us, what's inside the gates, if we're keeping that a mystery, right? Because ultimately, even if you get through that gate, even if you spent all that time and all that effort, you got an MFA, you got your PhD in order to get through that gate, and then you get inside the gate and you're like, what is this like terrible, like there's not even a ride here. I don't want to be here. Like, and then you get in there and you spend all that time, that money, that energy, that effort, just to find out that what's inside that gate wasn't even what you wanted. So like that whole like the mystique of our business, the kind of Wizard of Oz of it all, like pull the curtain back. You know, it's gonna hurt some people are gonna not love that concept, but you know, I think it's only gonna benefit the vast majority of people within not even just theater, but within art.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in to say, like, I think I'm an optimistic person, and I'm excited about the potential for new things in our field, but also just like in like theater as a whole and in like arts and entertainment as a whole. I think that, you know, the pandemic and the, you know, protests around racial justice have really started to push conversations that weren't really happening as much before, even though, you know, like people like those of us assembled here were kind of yelling into a void, it felt like, or like we're trying to have those conversations and weren't being listened to at all. But like I've felt like that is something that can really be like pushed forward now in a way that like a year ago it didn't really seem to be on anyone's radar. And I'm really excited about all the talent that's like opened up to us, because we've been forced to embrace technology in a way that I think a lot of us weren't necessarily doing before. Like I remember like over a year ago, I'd be like, oh, we have to do a Skype audition, you know. It's just like, oh, what a bummer. Because it's like, it's theater and you want people live in the room. But then now I think about it more about like, oh, right. But like, by always asking for that, I'm putting these barriers between people who don't live in New York, you know, and living in New York is a privilege because it's an expensive place to live. So now I'm like, oh, right. Like we can have like, you know, all these auditions for people who are all over the country and possibly all over the world and provide greater access, which just opens up new talent venues for us, like, you know, avenues for us to meet new people, which I'm also really excited about in a way that I think, you know, sometimes just like an old way of thinking became a way of like limiting opportunities. But now I'm like, oh, we have this new way of working. We can work with people remotely. You know, I'm sure all of us have gotten really good at doing like Zoom auditions and like auditions on all the different platforms and, you know, interacting with people that way. So I think that's something that we can continue to do while also embracing the inherently live nature of theater, which is the thing that we all love.
Yes, I hear you. It's interesting that you were just talking about like the accessibility, even around just like arriving to auditions and things like that. I have had, oh, I don't know what that was. That was exciting. I will say a pie in the sky idea I've had before asking anyone else on the panel to chat. Though it's wildly controversial for me to suggest is there a world in which we explore a stipend for actors who audition, paying actors to come into the room, and what does that look like? And that was something that I realized from my experience in New York in particular, having people audition and kind of thinking about like what they had to do to get from point A to point B, the preparation, the time that they put into that, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so much, it's so deep, such a deep, long conversation, but it is something that I've thought about. And with this new, with the past year, it's definitely kind of brought up like, oh, or is there another solution to this? That's because I know immediately it's going to be like, we don't want to pay for that. And a lot of companies are struggling as it is to like, to pay you the casting person. So I don't know, you know, it's a very long ways out to bring that up, but pie in the sky. Please, anyone else?
I am wishing and hoping, and I hope I can advocate for this once it becomes a sincere question that we're all asking. But if something that I think I've learned during, the remote casting and the world of the Zoom auditions, I truly believe now that the first 2 rounds of callbacks can be done on Zoom, can be all done virtually. I think that we'll have, in a concrete capitalist way, it will have economic benefits for the entire creative team. We can all just do this from our living rooms. Hopefully, I believe this will benefit actors, whether they're submitting tapes or whether they're just, I've had Zoom auditions where people will go into the back room of their day job, talk to us for 15 minutes, and then go back to their day job, and those people are heroes. And I'm hoping that, I think that could be a game changer, and I think that will have very obvious human benefits and hopefully very obvious economic benefits. And that is my pie in the sky.
Great. Any last thoughts on the subject before we move on to a question or two from the attendees?
I think I just have a couple of thoughts of like my pie in the sky. I'm kind of tired of the definition of art that has been created for us. And it was created by someone who doesn't look like me, who doesn't go about the world in the same way that I do, and doesn't go about the world in the same way that the global majority does. I want art that can disrupt that. Like, I'm really interested in disruption and disrupting an industry that wasn't built with me in mind. I think that there's also just space for nuance and complexity and specificity in a way that doesn't need validation from some other voice. Like, I want art to exist on its own and that it doesn't need somebody else's stamp of approval. And perhaps that's like a bit of a anti-capitalist thought, because I think in late stage capitalism, a lot of this is very difficult to achieve. But I do think that it matters and we should work towards it. I think we should work towards centering voices that haven't been centered for so long and that are still like working so hard to be seen. Like, we say representation matters. I want it to matter to people. And it's just, I love theater. I do it for the joy. I do it for the art. And I just want it to get back to that place of like leaving consumerism to the side and like what a certain group of people will enjoy during a matinee, and actually make art that pleases me as an artist, who pleases other artists. It's just, I want art to matter for the community more and have it be community based. And perhaps that doesn't fully answer your question, but that's kind of what's been on my brain this whole time.
Well, I think to fully answer the question, we'd be here for another 4.5 hours, maybe. So no sweat there, but I appreciate and love everything you just said. And it's so true. And frankly, I think that's another thing that I will say about this panel in general is that, like, when I started my work in casting, as I talked about at the beginning, a lot of the familiar faces that I started to recognize, that was something that I also noticed, was that like, oh, none of these people seem to come from any sort of similar background that I have. And so I completely had no idea like how I was going to chart this career as a result. And when I met a casting professional, and they shouted, "Oh my God, you're a unicorn!" at me, and it was kind of this like moment where I thought like, they did it lovingly, but I thought like, oh God, what does that mean? You know, like it wasn't true. I eventually found out, but that's all just to say that we collectively, I think, are doing doing some really radical work and some really cool stuff, and we all have really great ideas. And that's why I asked you to be here, because I wanted people to know who you are and to keep giving you jobs. We have a little bit of time to conquer some of these questions. So I will say this is, of course, maybe cliche to say, but like this is just the tip of an iceberg. These conversations can just continue on and on and on and on, and there's so much to chat about further. And I highly recommend anyone who's viewing to keep that conversation going and invite people to have other panels, have other discussions, have discussions within your own community, so on, and invite these lovely folks to join. One of the questions that came up twice was on the subject of, and this is a very common one I think we're asked, especially we ask each other privately, is compensation. And like, how do we figure that out? Actors Equity has a union, for example, that says, depending on where you live, this is the minimum. Depending on what kind of project, this actor gets paid this. There isn't a casting union. There is the CSA, the Casting Society of America, which I think all of you are either a member of or are a participant in some capacity, maybe in discussion. Nope, have some sort of relationship with? Nope. Oh, okay, well, I take that back. For me, personally, and I say this with all love for what they do, the CSA has always felt a little bit like possibly a private club, and I have been like, well, if they want to invite me, sure, but that's not always the case, and I know that they do a lot of great work. Long story short, what I want to know is, how do we talk about compensation, and how have you navigated those questions or challenges, if you can speak on it? I know some things are really like, you shouldn't speak on it or might be private, but yeah.
Yeah, I totally hear that. And I also think like we should work on busting that taboo of not talking about it, because not talking about it is what leads to people being like, oh. Yeah. And I will say, like, on the because I've been doing a lot of film and TV recently, on the film and TV side, there actually is a union that has minimums. We're part of the Teamsters. I'm a Teamster now, which is super exciting. Never thought I'd be a Teamster growing up. Not on my list of goals, but there are those, like, you know, minimums and protections and, you know, health insurance through that union once you've worked a certain amount of time and all of that. But that's only on the film and TV side. Theater's the wild, wild west. So I remember when I was first, you know, casting things on my own, and I literally just asked other casting people, like, how much should I charge? Like, I didn't know, like, I had no idea how to like start. It's like, how do you start figuring out what you're supposed to charge? Do you like sit here and go like, what is my time worth? And if I'm spending like, you know, 5 hours a day on this, or 2 hours a day on, you know, because you're doing multiple projects. And it's really, really hard to figure out at first. A lot of casting directors will bill based on like days that they are like in session days. Like, it's like, oh, this is a day that I have to like be in auditions, or like give my like focus and attention to this project, like physically. And then we'll also bill like prep days. Like, these are days when I was prepping those auditions or making lists or doing other things. And they'll kind of estimate a certain number of prep days and session days based on the size of the project. Some people bill by the number of roles in the project. So it'll be like, they'll have a set number, like, you know, this number, I don't know, it's like $500 per role, or like $1,000 per role, or $200 per role. It really depends on the project. And you have it based on the role. And then you'll also maybe bill expenses, like if you're, you know, renting an audition space, or if you're doing, like, you can bill expenses and things like that. But it is one of those things where you're just like, how much do I charge at first? So like, people, like, I've always been like, if people ask me, I'll just be like, hey, if it's like, oh, or if you've worked with that company before. Like, I got, last year I worked on a job independently, and it came through another casting director who was like, oh, I can't do this, but, you know, you guys should work with Destiny. And I was like, oh, thank you for the recommendation. And then I asked her, I was like, so how much did you charge them when you were doing this? You know, so I could get like a sense of like what the ballpark is, which is super helpful to be like, okay, this is like the ballpark for this kind of project. But I do think that it's one of those things that can be tough, because there's not that kind of sharing of information typically, but I'm hoping that we can establish like a kind of more open communication on that front between casting professionals.
Owning a friend is always the most useful thing in the entire world. So I'm going to completely echo what Destiny is saying. I think that's why I'm so committed to community building, because I want people that I can call on the phone to be like, I do not know what to charge this person, please help. But I can also say that I worked for an institution for a salary, which is a completely different conversation when you are particularly working for nonprofit theater. I will say that I was paid very little when I got started. So little, in fact, that like I live with my parents, and I will be very open about that. I have organized with folks in the institution to ask for a living wage in New York City. And I will scream this from the heavens. I think we all deserve a living wage. It's just the right thing to do. It's how to be a decent employer. And I think for the amount of work we do, that is like on the lower end of what we deserve. So I think always talk to somebody, talk to other assistants. If you are in an institution, like if you're coming in as an assistant, talk to the other folks around you if you can. Always negotiate with HR if there is an HR department or whoever you are speaking to who's a hiring manager. They typically expect you to negotiate. So being able to like be confident and talk to someone and put out another number, do not be afraid to put it out there. All they can do is say no, and then we work from there. So it's different being now in the independent space of trying to navigate what my value is monetarily. I could say $1 million, but I'm not going to make $1 million. But maybe I will one day. It's very, very challenging. And I think the more we talk about it, the more open we are, the better it is for all of us as a community. So if anybody ever wants to talk numbers, I'm here.
Same, me too. I hear you on that end. I think that kind of to piggyback a little bit off of the institution comment too, that I would advise all of us here to remember, if we don't actively already, and for anyone who's interested to also take into consideration, is like to never, I had wondered when I started out after my fellowship and was looking for work, like, what would I sacrifice to work for X institution, and was almost ready to like put up with anything to have that like credit on my resume and kind of like adding like extra value, like working for an institution off Broadway, that should mean something. It doesn't matter if they pay you so little. And I can't stress enough that that's something to unlearn, and like always like value yourself and your worth, and like learning or achieving how to do that and how best to advocate for yourself, as has already been mentioned, is so key. And these companies should be very fortunate to have great service, and they should be compensating us as well. It's a mutual thing, I feel, in many ways. So yeah, let's unless somebody has anything really they super want to jump in on, I'd like to try and get to at least one more question before we wrap up. So any other thoughts on the subject of compensation? Okay. One thing that I think is kind of a friendly last question to address today, somebody was wondering, like, what are other things that you are interested in? Like, I think for a lot of us, like going into casting, I found that I started off as a performer, and that was sort of my career trajectory. Come to find out, that is a common career trajectory for a lot of people who eventually move into casting. And to an extent, I might still perform today. I might dabble in writing here and there. So what are other areas that you're interested in, be it in our industry or otherwise? Like, and are you also pursuing other things, like to get yourself by as far as your finances are concerned, or things like that? Or just what are you interested in? Please share with us.
I'll jump in and kind of piggyback in terms of like salary, and the low paying nature of casting. I kind of was forced to have, a second job to pay the rent. And I know Jason's going to roll his eyes, but I'm going to talk about cats. But I found, just for my own sanity and mental health, that I needed to really carve out space for a non-art, non-theater, non-industry related hobby. And so I spend a lot of time volunteering and fostering for animal shelters around the city. I work or volunteer for 4 of them around here. And if anyone is looking to adopt a giant, sweet 10-month-old kitty, this is Curry, as in the food. And he's just the sweetest little muffin. He's a little sleepy right now. I just woke him up, but he is available for adoption through ACC, the Animal Control Center of New York. But yeah, that has been like my source of pandemic income is cat sitting and dog walking. That's how I've been able to pay my bills when a lot of my casting has been dramatically decreased during the pandemic. But it's also how I kind of create space between myself and my job. So yeah, that's my answer. Jason, you can stop rolling your eyes about cats because I love cats. But yeah, that's my answer.
I'm just going to challenge that, because one of the things that the reason why I probably am so enamored, I'm going to use enamored, we're going to use that word, with Andrea is because she has had to the point of the question, right? Is that there are things outside of the world that we work in. We both love what we do. We love actors, we love performers, but we also have like weird little things outside of everything that we do. I'm a huge coffee fan. I love coffee. I could sit there and drink coffee all day long with all of y'all and be so happy, and eat like a ham and cheese croissant. And I could do like morning, afternoon, dinner, and have that whole all day long. I love it. But that's also, weirdly enough, brought me into the worlds of people that are also business owners. So those business owners have taught me so much about owning a business, how to run a business, how to make relationships in the business, how to invest in local communities, because coffee shops in New York are all about investing in your local community and getting to know the neighborhood. So I've learned so much from those people, and it's actually weirdly kind of brought me back to what I do as a casting director and as a business owner. And so yeah, that's what I love to do. I like to drink coffee. That's so lame.
I mean, I think that just like with actors, I think the best like casting people and people in our field have other interests out. That's what like makes you like a well-rounded person who can talk about different kinds of experiences. We have other interests outside of just like theater and film and television and things like that. I personally, like, I've been really working on studying Spanish because I took Spanish in high school and then have not worked on it that much since. But it was always something that I wanted to do. And now I'm like, oh, I can focus on practicing my Spanish. And, I live in like the northern part of Harlem on the border of Washington Heights, and I really have a lot of real world application for my Spanish too. So, I'll go into like a bodega or like into the grocery store and like practice my Spanish with people. It's super fun. And it's something that I've like really enjoyed during this time, especially because it's like, everybody has a mask on, is like, but like, that's a way that you can kind of, like try something new and like, warm up to people, like, because they can't see you smiling, but it's like, oh, you practice like speaking different languages with people is a lot of fun. And the only other thing that I really love, I'm allergic to cats, so I won't be adopting a cat, unfortunately. Even though I love them, I love cats, but I'm just like, I get around them and then I can't breathe. So, but another thing that I feel is really, that I'm just really excited about is traveling again, because I used to really, really love to travel. I mean, I still do, but so I have a long list of the places that I'd kind of been putting off going, that now I feel like, okay, since I couldn't go for a year, now it's time to really start making those travel plans starting in like the summer and fall.
Before the pandemic, and now in retrospect, I'm very embarrassed by this. When people would ask me what my hobby was, I would say like, oh, I don't have one. I see plays. That's my hobby. I do casting. That's like all I am. That, what do you mean there are other things? And during the pandemic, I've started embroidering. I love it. I recommend for casting people, if this is something that interests you, just doing something with your hands while you watch TV, so your brain knows that you're not working. I've taught myself how to bake. My favorite thing that I make, and I would love to make this for all of you one day, is a bourbon chocolate chip pecan pie. I can't wait to feed people once this is lifted, and I would love to make a suggestion to everyone in our industry. I'm very fortunate to have someone like this in my life. One of my closest friends, after coming with me to he's not a theater person, he's not someone in the industry, but he went with me to a lot of networking events. He saw a lot of theater with me, and there was finally a day where he was like, I can't do this anymore, where he just like drew a line in the sand and now will like shut me down. I can complain to him about my day. I cannot tell him industry gossip anymore. And that has just been a very, it is a very grounding friendship that I'm grateful for. So I guess my recommendation is find something you like. And even if it is a cat, find someone who won't let you go down the rabbit hole if they can.
I read an article a couple years ago entitled the Radical Act of Embracing Your Mediocrity. So it really got me into hobbies that I sometimes drop and sometimes restart, and feeling okay with that because they give me joy in the moment. So I love like Inktober and like doodling and drawing with prompts. That's kind of saved me during the pandemic. Whenever I felt a little down, I would reach out on Instagram to my friends to be like, give me topics, and I would draw whatever they suggested to me. I also really love trivia, I found out during this pandemic, and will like snatch a crown for trivia. Like I love it. I have a team with a bunch of my friends from college. It's a lot of fun. And we try to be like jocks in that space, and it's not good, but it's a lot of fun. And I think once I'm like allowed to be in the world again, I'll be really excited to go back to all the drag performances I used to go to. That's a big part of my nightlife, was seeing drag and like just having a lot of fun and letting loose in the nighttime and supporting some amazing artists. They're still doing drag like over the internet or like drag and drive. But it'll be fun to like experience that and like experience the roaring 20s with a bunch of drag queens. So yeah, also I love food. So if you ever want to hang out, let's go to a restaurant, and that'll be really exciting. So that's kind of what I do outside of casting.
Yes, thank you all so much. We do have to, as you see, Francisco has reemerged. We have to wrap this up. There are so many other matters I wish we had the time to discuss. Of course, in the future, perhaps we can talk about things like, for viewers out there who are interested, there are other areas of casting. There's casting extras and commercials and opera and reality TV, and this is all fun stuff that we could explore sometime through conversation. So if you're like theater, that's it. It's such a box to fit in. There's more to it, and we could talk about it some other time. I'd love to one day talk about misconceptions for casting directors and how to navigate that as well. But in the meantime, thank you all. This is a really badass panel. People watching, hire them. That you and you and you and you and you and you, hire each of them, and you won't regret it. I promise. Thank you all. And thanks to my colleagues at the Playwrights Realm for checking us out.
Thank you so much, Ada, and thank you, everyone. Before we go, I just wanted to say to everyone who's watching, you will get a feedback form when you sign out of this event, and then also tomorrow on our follow-up email, where you also have the chance to request any reimbursements for any possible caretaking expenses that you might have incurred being here today. And in the feedback form, just because I saw that we had some questions that we didn't get to, we've put in the option of asking questions, and I'll share with the panelists, and maybe they can tackle them as well via email. Thank you so much. This is we're still creating new community programming, so please feel free to put that in the feedback if you have any subjects that you want to see. I'm plopping it in the chat. We have a link with all the upcoming offerings. Sorry, I sent that to Ada, not to everyone. Here you go. So check that link for more offerings, and we will have other editions of the Making Theater With series, so you'll get to hear from other professionals as well. But I just want to repeat, thank you so much to everyone. That was wonderful. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.